Welcome to the Young Turks. We have nothing but a gigantically fun show ahead for you guys. Two important news stories in the beginning. Then we move on to other wonderful news, like the president has picked a guy to be his top economic advisor that might be one of the most factually incorrect guys you could find in that area. Okay, he's the anti-Jank. Never gotten a prediction right. Okay, so we'll get into that. That's a fun story, slash, of course, as usual, disastrous for the country. What is the conservative mind rigged for? I'm going to explain that story to you later. You're going to love that story. Their minds are actually slightly different than ours. Literally, their brain structure is slightly different than a progressive's. And unfortunately, it makes all the difference. So that's a fascinating story. And then in the second hour, a record-breaking story. A story of how two white nationalists cucked each other. It was a cuck-off. You're gonna love that. Geez, Lord mercy, you're gonna love that story. Okay, so hell of a show for you guys tonight. And of course, afterwards, Rebel Headquarters. I have a heartwarming story on Rebel Headquarters. Let's do the show. Okay. So yesterday we had the national walkout of the students, and a lot of them went to Washington and then gave speeches, and their speeches were amazing and inspiring. And then some of the Democrats came out and also went to the podium. Bernie Sanders didn't go to the podium. We showed you yesterday, he grabbed a little megaphone and did it in the middle of the crowd. And then he was done and he had to go back to work. And he decided, as he was going back to work, this happened. Let's watch. Gee, I wonder if he's gonna win. Those folks in Washington live on a different planet. They think, oh no, Bernie's too old. Oh no, I've been in Washington 78 years. There's no way Bernie Sanders could win. Did you see Nancy Pelosi being mobbed by the crowd? Where they're like, Nancy, Pelosi. Now, I know she's not running for president, and it appears that Bernie is. It's gonna be, I know you're gonna find this statement outrageous. They always find me outrageous in Washington, in the pundit class. It's gonna be a cakewalk. So what you just saw there was a phenomenon. He's got all the energy. I mean, that little white halo, the back of his head walking through that crowd as the Bernie chant begins. Who's gonna match that? Klobuchar? Okay, I feel bad every time. There's nothing wrong with Senator Klobuchar, but the people have their champion, and it's pretty obvious who it is. So, by the way, we were carrying the Bernie Town Hall on Monday, right here on the Young Turks. It's going to be on income and inequality. His last one was on Medicare for All, and it was fantastic. It was really informative. A lot of people, again, in Washington would look at it and go, I mean, they're just talking about policy for an hour and a half. That's right, that's why people trust him. He's been doing this for the last 40 years. He's been consistent, he's been honest, and he's been fighting for those same progressive ideals that are now ascendant. So check that out at 7 o'clock Eastern at tytnetwork.com/live. He's gonna win. Okay, we'll move forward. Okay. Oh, by the way, Anna's gonna be there as well, I should say. All right. New story out today about Robert Mueller's investigation. Here's another doozy. I believe we are now finally at the heart of the matter. So let me quote the New York Times here, and I'll explain why I think this is so important. The special counsel, Robert Mueller, has subpoenaed the Trump Organization to turn over documents, including some related to Russia, according to two people briefed on the matter. The order is the first known instance of the special counsel demanding records directly related to President Trump's businesses, bringing the investigation closer to the president. Ding, 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 we have a winner, there you go. This has never been about Twitter impressions that Trump got from Russian meddling in the election. It's never been about the 21 Tumblr accounts that the Russians had. It's always been about the business deal that Trump has had with the Russians for a long time. That's the real heart of the matter, and it's the money laundering. So until we got to Trump's business records and finances, all of it was patty cakes. Well, now we're in the business records. So earlier I told you about how Mueller had subpoenaed some of his financial documents and materials from his bank, especially Deutsche Bank. Now that is really important. That's, you follow the money, you'll have your answers. Now he's inside the Trump organization, or at least requesting those records. And we're near the end game here, folks. So word of the subpoena comes as Mr. Mueller appears to be broadening his investigation to examine the role of foreign money may have played in funding in Mr. Trump's political activities. This is exactly what I've been warning you about for over a year now on the Young Turks. I said it was money laundering from day one. And so to help that deal along, the Russians might have put some money into this particular campaign, but their ties to Trump are deeper and historic. So you must look into that. Now, by the way, it's not just the Russians. In recent weeks, Mr. Mueller's investigators have questioned witnesses, including an advisor to the United Arab Emirates, about the flow of Emirati money into the United States. So there's a lot of different countries trying to bring in cash to affect our elections. Now our elections are an auction, so a lot of these countries are thinking, well, it appears that they can't even trace the money. A lot of it is dark money, and you're just allowed to buy these politicians. So let's maybe try to buy the president and see what happens. Well, luckily, at least this one is important enough that they're bothering to do an investigation, and perhaps we'll find out the truth of the matter in regards to those countries and others. And look, you can hardly blame the foreign countries because they think companies get to buy these politicians all the time, and they're multinational. So if a Russian or a Chinese company can be part of a trade group in America and purchase politicians because we have unlimited money in our politics, we have private financing in our elections, why can't we buy them? Now it's illegal, but again, very hard to trace because of the dark money. And we should go to the root of the problem, not just leave it at this and fix it. We should take all of the private financing out of the elections. Otherwise, they're just gonna go, oh, okay, you get caught if you go after the president, so let's just go buy 100 congressmen or 20 or 50 senators instead. Okay, so now back to this story. The Trump organization has said that it never really had real estate holdings in Russia, but witnesses recently interviewed by Mr. Mueller have been asked about a possible real estate deal in Moscow. Now, I happen to think that that's not the real issue at hand. I'm not worried that Trump was going to do some deal in Russia and hence wanted to help the Russians a little bit more. He already has a lot of those deals throughout the world, and he's already had giant conflict of interest issues in Argentina, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and the list goes on. No, that's regular Donald Trump corruption. No, it's not what Trump was planning to do in Russia. It's the money laundering that the Russians were doing through Trump in America. Now, I say that because I've already covered dozens of stories for you guys detailing some portions of what appears to be from the outside world money laundering, but you have to have the real actual financial documents and the business documents, and that's why these subpoenas are really important if you want to actually prove it in a court of law. And if you're going after the president because you think he might have broken the law, well, you better have really good evidence, and that's what Mueller is trying to gather up now. So an annoying part of this story is something that the press is calling a red line, and I'll tell you why it's annoying in a second. But let me read this from Maggie Haberman and Michael Schmidt's piece in the New York Times. Mr. Trump said in an interview with the New York Times in July of last year that the special counsel would be crossing, quote, a red line if he looked into his family's finances beyond any relationship with Russia. Well, first of all, the New York Times asked that question of him. Trump didn't bring it up himself, so I really blame the New York Times for that. They've done other great work on this issue, great journalism in this case and others. But when they were interviewing Trump, they're like, is it going to be a red line? Is it going to be a red line if he looks into your finances? So Trump's like, oh, that's a thing I can complain about? Yes, that'll be a red line if he looks into my personal finances. Why? Why did you even ask him that? What a silly question that is. And I'll tell you why it's silly. Because if Trump had a deal with the Russians which led to collusion in the election, well, it might be a financial deal that helps him personally. So how else would you look into that other than looking into his personal finances? That's the heart of the investigation. So I don't know why the New York Times brought up this red line, and the journalists love freaking out about red lines, and they're all like, oh, this might be a red line. Red line in what? Is it in law? Is it statutory? No, it's a phrase you made up for no reason. So look here, more context from this particular New York Times story. Mr. Mueller was appointed in May to investigate whether Mr. Trump's campaign colluded with the Russians to influence the 2016 presidential election and any other matters that may arise from the inquiry. Now, this would arise from the inquiry because what is Trump's motivation to help the Russians? What are the Russian motivations to help Trump? In order to investigate that, you'd have to know, do they have any financial deals? So any discussion of a red line is total BS, made up by the press to just make it sound more dramatic. Oh, a red line has been crossed. No, there's no red line. It doesn't make any sense at all. It's just a normal part of the investigation that you would do in almost any investigation along these lines. And they would do it for a private citizen. You would look into why, if there has been a crime committed, what's the motive? It's preposterous that that's even a part of the discussion. Now, finally, another piece of good news is that, as usual, Trump is so arrogant that he thinks he might be able to outwit the prosecutors. So please try. So the lawyers have advised Mr. Trump to refuse an interview, but the president wants to do it with Mueller as he believes he has done nothing wrong and can easily answer investigators' questions. It is inconceivable that he would not lie to those investigators. It's inconceivable that Donald Trump can go a whole paragraph without lying, which would be another crime. It's inconceivable that he is intelligent enough not to accidentally say something that'll get him in massive trouble. And by the way, I'm not interested in getting him in trouble on nitpicky stuff that he says by accident that is not a big deal. No. I only care if he accidentally reveals the money laundering or things he actually did that are major issues. Now, if it turns out he didn't really do it, and he goes in and tells a couple of white lies to Mueller about his affair with Stormy Daniels, I'm not interested in a Ken Starr-like investigation. Don't care about that. What I care about is the heart of the matter, and I think that Mueller is closing in on it. And if Trump goes to talk to him to try to outsmart him, that would be wonderful. Because, hey, look, if he's innocent, then he's right. It'll help clarify the matter, and then Mueller will have a better sense of it. If he's not, there's no way he's going to outsmart Mueller, and we'll find out a lot more. But as usual, follow the money, and you'll have your answer. All right, we got to take a quick break here. When we come back, if you thought Trump was stupid, wait till you get a load of his new chief economic advisor. You're going to love the quotes. We'll tell you when we return. All right, back on the Young Turks, guys. I gotta go. So let me just remind you real quick, though, of the Trump poll that we did yesterday. What was the dumbest thing he said in the last 24 hours? The Mexican mountain climbers, the Space Force, or the Marine Corps, spelled wrong. There's been over 3,500 votes on that, and I'll let you know right now, mountain climbers are winning. Space Force is in second, and I voted for Marine Corps, but it's trailing badly. So get out there and vote, do your patriotic duty, tytnetwork.com/dumbass to vote in that poll. All right, let's go over here. So we have a new chief economic advisor for Donald Trump. So did he go with a Nobel laureate, a professor, an expert in the field, someone who's worked in government recently on this issue? Nope, he went with another TV star. Well, I mean, Omarosa's gone, so he needs to fill his reality show back up with people he's familiar with. And since he doesn't read, the only people he's familiar with are the people on TV. This time it's Larry Kudlow from CNBC. So there were rumors about this, and then this morning, Trump confirmed it with this tweet. Larry Kudlow will be my chief economic advisor as director of the National Economic Council. Our country will have many years of great economic and financial success. As usual, capitalized for no apparent reason. Anyway, with low taxes, unparalleled innovation, fair trade, and ever-expanding labor force leading the way, #MAGA. Now, Kudlow did not agree with him on tariffs. His last chief economic advisor left ostensibly because they didn't agree on the tariff issue. The reality is Gary Cohn wanted to leave before the indictments, and he already got his trillions of dollars in tax cuts. Anyway, but Kudlow also didn't agree, but apparently he told the president, I submit, I now think tariffs are a brilliant idea. Okay, good boy, good boy. Now, let's examine what an idiot Larry Kudlow is and how he has the worst track record on predictions you could possibly imagine. Before we get to the predictions, which are fun, let's go over his history a little bit. I feel a little bad going all the way back to 94, but not too bad. In 1994, after serving for years as the chief economist at Bear Stearns, Kudlow was fired when he confessed to an insane $100,000 per month cocaine habit. Wow. I can't imagine spending $100,000 a month on anything, let alone on cocaine. How much cocaine do you have to do to spend $100,000 in a month? Wow, okay. But he said, look, that's okay, I'm reformed, and he took a job in journalism afterwards because he had gone to a fancy celebrity clinic and he was fine. But then, some 15 months after he was ousted from Bear Stearns, his wife filed for divorce, and per the New York Times, quote, in order to prevent Mr. Kudlow from tapping their Bear Stearns retirement account to pay for a weeks-long cocaine binge. So apparently not fine back then. Okay, just a little bit of fun background, but look, they say that he's been okay for decades, and that is not my issue with him. And if he had a problem in the past and it's in the past, no problem at all. We're progressives, we believe in redemption, and I have no reason not to believe that he's not doing that anymore. Bear Stearns, by the way, of course, later went bankrupt in the economic collapse that Kudlow claimed wasn't really happening. All right, a couple more fun things before we get to the economic stuff, which is what he was ostensibly hired for. He once said that Sarah Palin will strengthen the McCain presidential case. Suffice it to say, she did not. He then at one point said that the Iraq war was a really good idea. He thought because it might help the economy and the stock market. I'm not sure that that's a very good reason. But he also said that he would, quote, revive the American spirit. Suffice it to say, the Iraq war has not revived the American spirit. Then he went on to talk about Fukushima once, back in 2011. Remember the famous nuclear meltdown in Japan. Listen carefully to how he prioritizes here. Watch.
All in all, the market taking this in stride.
I mean, the human toll here looks to be much worse than the economic toll, and we can be grateful for that. And the human toll is a tragedy. We know that. But these markets are, say, all these markets, right? Stocks, commodities, oil, gold. There is no major breakout or breakdown.
Wow. Is it surprising that Trump picked this guy to be his chief economic advisor? Luckily, the economic toll to my pocketbook is not as bad as the human toll, which is, of course, irrelevant to me and all my rich friends. Wow, even his co-anchors seem to be looking at him like, did he just say that? By the way, he was wrong on the economic toll as well. It wound up costing $200 billion. Is there anything Larry Kudlow is not wrong about? Well, so now let's go to the heart of the matter about economics, because he's going to be the chief economic advisor to the president of the United States. So back when Bill Clinton was president, he said there is no question that President Clinton's across-the-board tax increases will throw a wet blanket over the recovery and depress the economy's long-run potential to grow. That turned out to be massively wrong. The economy boomed under Bill Clinton in an unprecedented fashion. The tax increases did not lead to an economic downturn. Instead, there was terrific economic times. Unemployment went down, inflation was in check. His beloved stock markets went soaring. He was wrong on every count. Now let's go to a little bit more recent prediction about the Bush era. He said at the time, but at the end of the day, it will be the middle-class American worker who will benefit most from the pickup in capital formation brought on by Bush's latest tax cuts. Investors will respond to fresh economic incentives, and a new flow of capital will generate stronger markets, a true business expansion, higher productivity, more jobs, and perhaps, most importantly, outsized gains in real worker wages. Monstrously wrong. Wages flatlined. Later, we had an economic crash where not only did we not have more jobs, we lost 8 million jobs. The tax cuts under Bush did not work. They did not stimulate the economy. They crashed the economy. But Kudlow got a tax cut, and so did all his rich friends. Oh, it actually hurt the average American? Exactly the opposite of what Kudlow said? At the end of the day, who cares? Now, why is a guy this wrong on CNBC as a so-called expert in the first place? Because CNBC isn't here to serve you. They're here to serve rich folks who think, oh, the American worker has flatlining wages. Their wages are stagnant, but the markets are up. High five. Okay, so Kudlow's been high-fiving them ever since, but we haven't gotten to the best part yet. Clinton era Kudlow, early Bush era Kudlow. Well, 2007, 2008, Kudlow says, hold my beer. Here comes even worse predictions. He said at the end of 2007, there's no recession coming. The pessimistas were wrong. It's not gonna happen. The Bush boom is alive and well. It's finishing up its 6th consecutive year with more to come. He said that in December of 2017. The recession began in December of 2017. He was massively wrong, and of course, the economic collapse that enveloped the world happened a couple of months later. And as it was happening in the beginning of 2018, Kudlow's back for more. Banks are taking significant steps to repair their balance sheets. Even though some people might not be happy with the speed, the reality is things are improving. The banks did no such thing. Things were not improving. All the banks collapsed, and so did the world economy. Nailed it. One last one. He said, I'm going to bet, this is also early 2008, I'm going to bet that the economy will be rebounding sometime this summer, if not sooner. We're in a slow patch, that's all. It's nothing to get up in arms about. Once again, totally and completely wrong. The market crashed afterwards. There was no recovery for a long time until, by the way, President Obama raised taxes on Kudlow's rich friends, and lo and behold, another recovery. Now, look, whether those things are connected are long economic discussions. What is not is Larry Kudlow's track record. That's a simple discussion. He's almost never been right. Trump looks at that and goes, winner, I'll take that guy. Never right, always favors the rich, and a big blowhard on TV. He's like, I fail to see how this guy wouldn't be in my administration. So he is now Trump's chief economic advisor. God help us all. Okay. Now, Let's go from Republican foibles to Democratic foibles. Okay, well, also Republican. So the economic crash happened in 2008. The banks were taking wild risks with derivatives. They had too much leverage, and when their bets went wrong, particularly on the housing market, they didn't have enough money to cover those bets, so they all collapsed. And of course, the American taxpayer had to bail them out. Well, the Obama administration came in and did fairly weak regulations, Dodd-Frank, but at least it had some positive parts about keeping leverage in check, not nearly to the degree that I think is prudent. And I think it's already teetering on the edge as we speak. And I'm not the only one who thinks that. A lot of top economists and businessmen are worried, and they're giving warnings about be careful about the markets because, again, the banks are over leveraged. So what does Congress decide to do? Oh, I got a great idea. Why don't we let the banks run wild again? Oh. Now, they say there's no bipartisanship in Congress, but I tell you that that's not true. I tell you all the time. And we have bipartisan deals all the time. And we have another one. As long as somebody's paying for them, and in this case, the banks have stepped up to the plate and they have bought a sufficient number of Republicans. In fact, all of them. John McCain was absent from the vote, but every other Republican voted for it. And 16 Democrats easily pass a bill to deregulate the banks and let them take more risks. Oh boy. So let's go to the Los Angeles Times here to explain. Nearly 8 years after Congress dramatically toughened banking regulations after the financial crisis, the Senate took a rare bipartisan step and voted Wednesday to ease some rules on small and mid-sized banks. But larger banks also got some breaks in the legislation. Now that's very important. I'll explain those breaks for you in a second. That's probably what's going to crash the economy again. But it does drive me crazy whenever they say there's rare bipartisanship. And understand how this shell game is played. When the donors agree, you will have bipartisanship. It will almost never be in favor of the American citizens. It will be in favor of whatever the private interests that finance those elections are. We allow private financing, so of course they always agree that those financiers should get whatever they want, including banking deregulation in this case. The reason we have gridlock on all the other issues is because the donors don't want any action on those issues. So for example, the gun manufacturers don't want you to pass any legislation about guns. Right now it's the wild, wild west. They sell more guns, so you get gridlock. But that gridlock is also bought by the donors. So there's terrific consistency here, and unfortunately a lot of the reporters miss it completely, but that's okay. We're here to give context and analysis. So let's talk about the Democrats now. A group of moderate Democrats, several of whom face re-election this fall in states handily won by President Trump, joined with Republicans in voting 67-31 to enact the first major rollback of the 2010 Dodd-Frank financial overhaul law. Now, also drives me crazy when they call them moderate Democrats. And I'm not trying to beat up on the LA Times here. They had a good story, I'm quoting them. Almost every major print organization and certainly everybody on TV does the same exact thing. They call these Democrats moderates. But it's not a moderate position to be in favor of banking deregulation. Now, if you showed me a poll from red states, Kansas, Montana, South Carolina, Alabama, that said, oh, Republican voters and independent voters love big banks, or they even love mid-sized banks. And they think, my God, will you just take the shackles off of the poor bankers? You show me that poll and I'll call them a moderate. They're not moderate. I know the polls, I've seen them. I just reported on a poll from Kansas 3rd District. 77% say you have to get tougher on the banks, regulate them more, not less. The moderate position would be to regulate the banks, not to deregulate them. But whenever they agree with Republicans, Democrats get to be called moderates. No, they're being right-wingers, they're being corrupt, but they are not being centrist because Republican voters don't like it any better than Democratic voters. That's why Eric Cantor lost his seat in an unprecedented loss in the primaries when he was the House Majority Leader. He lost to Dave Brandt, who ran against the big banks. So please call them what they actually are, because they are nowhere near moderate or centrist. Okay, Mike Crapo, Crapo, is the senator who sponsored this. He's a Republican. And he was, of course, celebrating this so-called bipartisanship. He said, at a time of intense political polarization, we have proven we can work together to get things done. He's the Senate Banking Committee chairman. Well, let me show you how they work together to get things done. Let me show you a list of the Democrats who voted for this bill and the amount of money that they have gotten from the financial industry. So, as you look at this graphic 37B. Oh yeah, there you go. Hey, Senator Bennett, you want $3.9 million from the financial sector from 2013 to 2018? All of a sudden, voting with the Republicans. Gee, I wonder why, I can't quite tell. Look all the way down that list and all you have is Democrats getting massive amounts of money, usually millions of dollars. Warner in Virginia getting $3.5 million. Tester in Montana. Why are banks giving $1.8 million to a senator from Montana? And the list goes on and on and on. So you want to get bipartisanship, you should buy the partisanship and you'll get exactly what you paid for. And those Democrats do as they are ordered by their donors. Understand that it is nothing but corruption. Anyone who tells you that it's for political reasons, has never checked a poll, and doesn't know anything about politics, that position does not test well in Montana at all. If you say it's about policy, that they have legitimate policy disagreements, really? 93% of Americans believe that the politicians serve their donors and not their voters. When you get nearly $4 million from a bank or from anyone, are you likely to do what they tell you? Yes, the rest of the planet realizes that, apparently except every political reporter in the country. All right, now what is President Trump's position on this? Because I know he ran against the globalists and the financial elites. Laugh along with me. President Trump commended the Senate on the bill's passage and would sign it into law, the White House said. What happened? I thought you were against the bankers and the globalists and the financial elites. It turns out you were lying all along. Now, of course, Trump voting with the financial elites, voting with the banks, and all that populist rhetoric he had in the campaign, total, utter nonsense, never meant one word of it. And now to the Democrats who voted with him. What happened to the resistance? I thought you guys were all about, oh my God, we're gonna resist Donald Trump. We're gonna get out in the streets and grab a microphone and a podium and, oh yeah, resist. How much money did the banks give me? Millions of dollars? We'll resist them on Friday, but not today. Thursday is not resistance day. Thursday is give the bankers whatever the hell they want day because they paid us and Donald Trump. Funny how that works. Proof's in the pudding, it's right here. All right, so what does this disastrous bill do? The legislation would remove Dodd-Frank's mandatory stricter oversight for about 24 larger banks, those with assets of as much as $250 billion. The bill would give the Federal Reserve regulators more flexibility in how they oversee large banks. Now, less flexibility means you must regulate them. You have certain rules that they must abide by. More flexibility means that, don't worry about it. The Federal Reserve under Donald Trump, oh, I'm sure they're gonna get really tough on the banks. As long as it's voluntary, okay. The bill would weaken regulators' ability to enforce fair lending requirements by exempting 85% of banks and credit unions from Dodd-Frank data reporting requirements designed to help identify discriminatory practices. Great, let's go back to discriminatory practices, and later when we crash the economy, we'll blame it on the poor and minorities again. Okay, classy move. Now, it keeps getting worse. Part of the legislation could allow JP Morgan Chase and Citibank, two of the very biggest banks in the US, to hold less capital relative to their assets, undercutting one of the 2010 Dodd-Frank's law's safety measures. That's reported by HuffPost. That right there is the most important part. If you allow for greater leverage, they will leverage up to the maximum eventually. The reason is when you leverage more, you make more money. So you get all the upsides and you put it in your pocket and you go home. You take your bonuses, you get your mansions, your yachts, all that stuff, right? And then if your leverage doesn't work out and it crashes, you go back to the American taxpayer, man, there was nothing we could do. This just kind of happened. I mean, look, there's cycles in business. Who could understand it? I'm sure that Trump and Kudlow will figure it out. So they're going to tell you that there was nothing they could do. No, this is it. They could have actually made sure that they limited leverage. Instead, they chose not to. And so they will make more money in the short run, and they will definitely crash. I would say in the long run, but it ain't gonna take that long. The Congressional Budget Office, this is a little icing on the cake here, estimated that the bill would add $671 million to the federal budget deficit over the next decade. Funny, it's how these so-called moderates and centrists, when progressives like Bernie Sanders say, hey, how about college for all or Medicare for all, where we actually deliver for Americans, make sure that they don't die if they have a pre-existing condition or if their kids have a shot at equality of opportunity by going to college. No. That's not practical. That'll add to the deficit. It'll add to the deficit. We can't have it. American people don't want that. But the American people want you to add to the deficit to help the big banks. That's what the American people are screaming for. In Indiana, in North Dakota, and Montana, where these corporate Democrats are from. They're like, oh, please help the big banks, please. It does. I don't care about the deficit as long as it's going to the banks. How do you report this stuff with a straight face? Okay, and then speaking of a straight face, I love this. We're back to my old friend Barney Frank. Dodd-Frank is named after Senator Dodd and Congressman Frank. We've interviewed Barney Frank before on the show, and he said, what do you want us to do? Take none of the banker money instead of 20%? Yes, that way you wouldn't be corrupt. Instead, you're a perpetual loser where you get 20% of the banker money, the Republicans get 80%, and that's how they keep on winning. What a preposterous system. Anyway, Barney Frank follows up with this preposterous quote. He says, don't worry, quote, once this bill becomes law, that's the end of it. Oh yeah, I'm sure the Republicans will say, oh, you know what? You helped our banker friends. But that's all. We don't want to be greedy or anything. We'll just end it at that. And the bankers, they would never be greedy and ask for more. Oh wait, here's Senator Patrick Toomey, who's a Republican from Pennsylvania. Quote, much more needs to be done. What happened, Barney Frank? I thought you had this thing figured out. I think that you said that that's the end of it. The minute that it's passed, the Republicans are like more deregulation, more profits in the short run, privatize the profits, socialize the costs. So it's a shell game. These Democrats are paid to lose. Why? Because why did the bankers give 20% to the Democrats? So they go, good boy, you vote with me, you make sure I get everything I want, and then you go, oh, there was nothing we could do. Oh, we had to vote with the Republicans. Oh, what could we do? I guess we lost on this one again. Paid to lose by the donors. All right, so let me show you those losers that take money from their donors so they could vote with the Republicans and Donald Trump to help the big banks and the mid-sized banks. Tom Carper, Christopher Coons, Joe Donnelly, Joe Manchin, of course, Bill Nelson, Gary Peters, John Tester, Mark Warner, a who's who list of corrupt Democrats who always vote with the donors. All right, let me give you more. Tom Carper, Doug Jones. Oh, I like this part of the list. Tim Kaine, Maggie Hassan, Heidi Heitkamp, Claire McCaskill, Jean Shaheen, Debbie Stabenow, Michael Bennett. Wait, Tim Kaine? I was told by Hillary Clinton that Tim Kaine was a champion of the people, that he was gonna fight for progressives. Tim Kaine. Well, I do know a guy who would fight for progressives. Luckily, earlier today, we interviewed him. Anna Kasparian interviewed Bernie Sanders, who was very much against this bill. He and a number of progressive senators led by Elizabeth Warren and Sherrod Brown fought back against this bill, but as usual, the majority of the Democrats lost, as they are supposed to. But the progressives actually did fight, and it was a spirited fight, and Bernie Sanders was among those. So let's listen to him.
I do believe that one of the reasons why so many Democrats turned their backs on Hillary Clinton during the past general election was because they felt that she was too friendly to these big banks. And I think it's fascinating that some of our Democratic senators are not learning anything from what happened.
I could not agree with you more. Let us not forget, not for a second, and I'm afraid many of my colleagues did, what that 2008 crash did to millions of workers who lost their jobs, people who lost their homes, people who lost their life savings. And then we ended up bailing out these guys, and none of them on top were prosecuted for illegal behavior, despite paying billions of dollars in fines for illegal behavior. So I agree with you, and I worry very much about any Democrat who continues to be sympathetic to Wall Street.
But now, look, of course, I agree with Bernie Sanders' policy point of view there. He's clearly correct, and factually speaking, that's exactly what happened during the recession, et cetera. But it's not about the Democrats not learning their lesson, whether it's in terms of policy, the deregulation leading to crashes, or politics leading to losses when you support your donors. They're paid not to learn those lessons. You see, they have a different motivation than us. We keep assuming, why won't these Democrats do the progressive thing? Because you didn't pay them to do the progressive thing. The banks paid them for deregulation, and they got exactly what they bargained for. The first time they gave to Mark Warner, as an example, it was a little bit of a risk, not much of one. You know where Mark Warner stands. He's going to support the donors. It was a little bit of a risk. Hey, Mark, here, take some money from the banks and do as you're told. The second time they give to Mark Warner or Tim Kaine or any of the other people on this list, that's a return on investment. Hey, we gave to Senator Warner and Senator Kaine, and they were good little boys, and they did exactly as they were told. JP Morgan is not running a charity. They're not giving to politicians out of the goodness of their heart. They must get a return on investment. And for these corrupt Democrats, they got exactly what they bargained for. The banks got what they wanted, the corruption that they paid for, and the Democrats got what they wanted, millions of dollars in campaign contributions. You must go vote in primaries. You must vote in primaries. If you think these Democrats are going to represent you, you're out of your mind. These 16 Democrats, the corporate Democrats, the establishment Democrats, will always represent the people who write the checks. They will represent their donors because that is what they're paid to do. tytnetwork.com/register. It's just an easy URL. It'll be in the description box below. It takes you to a government website that shows you where to vote, how to register, how to get a mail-in ballot. Please go to that URL. You'll find your state, and you must vote in primaries and vote these bums out. Otherwise, you'll never be represented. Young Turks.
Hey Cenk, what's up?
Aaron, I want to do a YouTube live clip, but not live. Go.
Hey Dave, as you can probably see, Skype froze. Frozen crashed.
You know, I'm watching that documentary on the Vietnam War, and there was a TV journalist in the middle of some tiny little village in Vietnam doing live TV as the soldiers were burning the Vietnamese huts, and it didn't crash. And that was 1965, and he was in Vietnam.
Robbie Canal, he calls his work urban beautification.
I didn't go out to be a street artist or to make posters. I was just compelled to do it. I was mad enough it didn't matter. It was like a form of minor civil disobedience even. You know, like, fuck you. How about your higher crime? Power operates to self-replicate itself, to maintain the status quo so it stays in power. When you go to do something like this, to express yourself in public about an issue you care about, make sure you pick a bigger weapon, and the weapon is knowledge. The one thing about street art, it's not like I put up my posters to change anybody's mind about anything. The difference between propaganda and the kind of art I do is propaganda is telling people what to think. The way the art works, where the art works, is between the time you see it and the time you figure it out for yourself. I'm an optimist. I might have made a lot of ugly paintings about a lot of ugly people, but it's out of love, not for them.
right, back on the Young Turks. Ahmad Garavi writes in on YouTube Super Chat, why did Jen keep talking about the 2018 crash in the Kudlow segment? Capitalist crash was 2008. If I made that mistake, which apparently I did, Bart, yep, my bad. And thanks for pointing that out, Ahmad. Of course I meant 2008. Just a slip of the tongue. Okay, Disney Princess says $100,000 on cocaine. Bravo, sir. Captain Jinglepants says 1.2 million in coke every year. Charlie Sheen, step up your game. You're falling behind. I like that. It's my new favorite saying is hold my beer. Charlie Sheen with cocaine. Larry Kudlow's like, hold my beer. All right, so let's go over here and do torture. Don't worry, I'm not going to torture you guys. I'm going to tell you about it. All right, Gina Haspel is the deputy director of the CIA. She's now being appointed by Donald Trump to be the lead at the CIA, director of the Central Intelligence Agency. That is problematic because she might be arrested in Europe. Fascinating. Let's find out more about that. So, law and crime reporting here. Federal prosecutors in Munich are currently reviewing a request to issue an arrest warrant for Gina Haspel, President Donald Trump's recently named director of the Central Intelligence Agency. Why? Let's explain. On June 6, 2017, European Center for Constitutional and Human Rights initiated a request for legal action against Haspel by filing an intervention with the German Federal Public Prosecutor, the foremost law enforcement authority in the Federal Republic of Germany. So this was back when she was named deputy director, and that is when we found out the extent of her role in torturing people under the name of America. And that is illegal. It's illegal under international law as well as domestic law, as I'll explain here in a second. But since this is a situation that concerns international law, they're like, well, she clearly broke it. So that's why we'd have to arrest her. Let's give you more details. The ECCHR's request, that's again the Constitutional and Human Rights in Europe, of the European Convention on Human Rights Article 3. It's an alleged violation of that. This article prohibits torture and inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment. There are no recognized exceptions or limitations on the right not to be subject to torture under this section. What they're saying there is you don't get to say, yeah, I torture someone, but there's an exception because I was with the CIA and the CIA is allowed to torture people. No, there are no exceptions. The CIA is not allowed to break the law and they're not allowed to torture people. So, as Wolfgang Kalik explains, he's the general secretary of the group, those who commit, order, or allow torture should be brought before a court. This is especially true for senior officials from powerful nations. The prosecutor must, under the principle of universal jurisdiction, open investigations, secure evidence, and seek an arrest warrant. If the deputy director travels to Germany or Europe, she must be arrested. So that investigation is continuing, and so they have not issued an arrest warrant yet, but they might well indeed. Now, if she was wanted on a charge of mugging, she accosted someone in the streets of Munich and took $80 out of their wallet, and there was an arrest warrant, well, we would have to honor that arrest warrant. That's outrageous. You can't have a head of the CIA that does muggings, but torture is a much greater violation of the law than a mugging for $80. So what the Europeans are doing here is insisting on following the law, which I know must be strange for the CIA. So, but let's find out what she did. From 2002 to 2005, Haspel was an active participant in the CIA's Extraordinary Rendition Program. The term extraordinary rendition is a soft euphemism for the CIA's illegal kidnapping and torture program administered at so-called CIA black sites, a series of off-the-books prisons where CIA agents and assets regularly allegedly tortured detainees over the course of several years. Now, these charges are about torture because that's international law as well as domestic law. What they don't talk about in the context of this story is why it's allegedly tortured. That's because Gina Haspel also destroyed the tapes. We had taped the torture. Haspel's signature is on the document saying burn the evidence, which is deeply illegal here in the United States of America. But if people in power do it, apparently it doesn't count. If you destroy evidence in a case, you're in a world of trouble. Somebody in power does it, whatever, right? So, but that's for us here to deal with internally in America. Now back to the torture. Specifically, Haspel was in charge of the CIA's Cat's Eye, a secret prison located in Thailand. Haspel allegedly oversaw the daily torture of detained individuals at Cat's Eye. According to media accounts and the memoirs of a former CIA personnel, Haspel was personally involved in the torture of Zain al-Abidin Mohammed Hussein, also known as Abu Zubaydah. Infamously, Zubaydah was then waterboarded at least 83 times. You know something works if you have to do it 83 times. Oh right, no, they tried it 83 times and they got nothing from him because it doesn't work. Haspel allegedly oversaw 2 psychologists, Mitchell and Bruce Jessen. These 2 men designed the torture techniques and who actually carried out the torture on the prisoners, according to a CIA whistleblower, John Kirkow, who was prosecuted by the Obama administration for leaking classified information about the CIA's torture program. Eventually, the CIA was forced to admit that Zubaydah was not affiliated with Al-Qaeda and had never taken up arms against the United States. Oops, she tortured the hell out of him and it turns out he didn't do it. Oh well, another day at the CIA, let's move on. In fact, let's not move on. Let's promote her to deputy director and now to director. Anyone who votes for her confirmation is saying, I wholly approve of torture and burning evidence and has no leg to stand on when anyone else does it in courts. Or they're just raising their hand and going, I believe in a 2-tier justice system where the powerful and the elites get to break the law nonstop and the rest of the country has to follow the rules because they're rules that are not meant for justice. They're rules that are just meant to keep you down and in your place. So by the way, if you noticed, the Obama administration basically as complicit as the Bush administration or the Trump administration here. In some ways worse, yes, Bush did the torture. Trump says he loves the torture and hence promotes Haspel now to his nominee for the CIA director. But Obama's the one that said, I'm gonna make it legal, I'll get to that in a second. And the guy who reported it, how dare you report what the Bush administration did in torturing people? They put that guy in prison. The torturers got away scot-free. The guy who reported on the torture put into prison. No, the elites, they're all part of the same team. Okay, again, back to Colin Kalmbacher at Law and Crime. Torture is illegal under various international pacts and treaties to which the US is bound as a state party. Torture is also illegal under US domestic law. They should all be in prison, but certainly Gina Haspel, who is on the record as running those torture sites, authorizing the torture, and then authorizing the destruction of evidence. But on April 16th of 2009, then President Barack Obama announced blanket immunity for any and all US officials engaged in the Bush administration's torture program. At the time, he made this preposterous statement. He said, we don't look backward, we only look forward. If you don't look backward, by definition, you could never ever prosecute any crime. They all happened in the past. Well, they do look backward if it's you, the average citizen. But when it's the powerful, oh man, we don't look backward. Oh golly gee, I guess we can't prosecute anything. The bankers, you're free to go. The torturers, you're free to go. But Europe doesn't have the same government as we do. They don't have the same immunity for breaking the law as we do. So I hope they follow through on this. According to every law and every treaty, they must, as a matter of law, arrest our CIA director if she's confirmed. So if she's confirmed, I hope she goes to Europe at some point because I can't wait to chant, lock her up, lock her up. And that's on a serious issue, not some trifling email crap. But when you violate the idea of America, but you break all our laws and you do it for sick cruelty. Okay, so now let's go to the next story. Donald Trump apparently met with the Prime Minister of Canada and lied to him. Oh, that's great. And he was just in a fundraiser in Missouri and he decided he was gonna brag about it. So it was recorded, we now have the audio, This is what he told his donors about how he lied to Trudeau.
Trudeau came to see me. He's a good guy, Justin. He said, no, we have no trade deficit with you. We have none. Donald, please, nice guy, good-looking guy comes in. Donald, we have no trade deficit. He's very proud because everybody else, were getting killed with him. So he's proud. I said, wrong, Justin, you do. I didn't even know. Josh, I had no idea. I just said you're wrong. You know why? Because we're so stupid. And I thought they were smart. I said, you're wrong, Justin. He said, no, we have no trade. I said, well, in that case, I feel differently. I said, but I don't believe it. I sent one of our guys out. His guy, my guy, they went out. I said, check, because I can't believe it. Well, sir, you're actually right. We have no deficit, but that doesn't include energy and timber. I'm talking about Canada. You know how the timber comes. And when you do, we lose $17 billion a year. It's incredible.
So, of course, that's not true, the last part. The Washington Post reports the United States Trade Representative says the United States has a trade surplus with Canada. Okay. So it's not surprising that Donald Trump made up the last part about us having a deficit. It's also not surprising that he brazenly lied to the Canadian Prime Minister by his own admission there. He said, I didn't know, so I just made it up. I just said, oh yeah, we do. We have a trade deficit with you. He laughs about it, not publicly to you guys, but to his donors, his real friends. Remember when he was up on stage with all the other Republicans in the primaries, he's like, oh, they're all corrupt, they all take money from the donors. I know, because I used to be a donor. I give them money, they do whatever I tell them to do. Now what's Donald Trump doing? Going kissing the ass of the donors. And when they think they're all private, in a private setting together, they're like, oh yeah, well guys, don't worry, I lie to all the foreign officials, it's great, I make up stuff. By the way, aren't you embarrassed at all that you went to a meeting with the Prime Minister and you had no idea if we had a deficit or surplus when that was the topic matter at hand? He doesn't do any homework and he brags about it. And now those donors in the room laughing, yucking it up. He says, oh yeah, we must have had a deficit because we're all so stupid. Oh, he called a former government official stupid. And how's that for irony? Oh, Donald, you're so great, you're wonderful. More tax cuts for me, right? More tax cuts and deregulation for me, right, Donald? I'll laugh at any stupid thing you say. Oh, you're lying to people. Oh, that's so great. More tax cuts, more tax cuts. So Trump is embarrassed that he got caught lying, so he sends this rambling tweet this morning. He said, we do have a trade deficit with Canada, as we do with almost all countries, some of them massive. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau of Canada, a very good guy, doesn't like saying that Canada has a surplus versus the US negotiating. But they do, they almost all do. And that's how I know. Okay, Office of the United States Trade Representative, which is part of the government of Donald Trump. Exports were 320.1 billion, imports were 307.6 billion. The US goods and services trade surplus with Canada was $12.5 billion in 2016. We included the math just in case you weren't sure. It's not true. He knows it's not true. We don't have a trade deficit, we have a trade surplus with Canada. Small side note, he's a good guy, he's very good looking. Why is that relevant? Because he judges people based on their looks. And this has been reported over and over. Insiders in Trump's White House will say, oh, like he didn't pick Chris Christie because he didn't like the way he looked. Oh God. He thought about Mitt Romney as Secretary of State because he thought he was out of central casting for Secretary of State. He likes the generals because they look good. This moron is in charge of our government. Okay, speaking of which, unrelated to the lying, just a couple of other fun parts of the fundraiser. He talked about the tax cuts. That's the thing they care most about, right? And now Republicans have tested the phrase tax cuts. It's not testing well anymore. It used to, but it doesn't anymore. So they changed it to tax reform because they don't want you to think that it's tax cuts for the rich, which is because it's tax cuts for the rich. In fact, those are the rich that are paying for that dinner with Donald Trump in Missouri. Okay. But Trump doesn't understand that because he's an idiot, so he says this instead. Do me a favor, don't call it tax reform. It hasn't worked in 45 years. No, they just changed it to tax reform recently. It used to work all the time. Anyway, you say you're reforming taxes, that means taxes could go up. I actually said, let's call it the tax cut plan. I actually did. He's not joking. I reported on that story at the time. He wanted the actual bill, the legislation in Congress, to be called the tax cut plan. Okay, and then finally, he's talking about how China's killing us on the trade. Oh, they got this big surplus with us, and that's how they're powering their economy. I'll tell you that right now, okay? Then he says this, and help me understand what in the world this means. And I'm not like, that was a transition. China surplus, then this comment. It's called a bowling ball test. Do you know what that is? That's where they take a bowling ball from 20 feet up in the air and they drop it on the hood of the car. And if the hood dents, then the car doesn't qualify. Well, guess what? The roof dented a little bit and they said, nope, this car doesn't qualify. It's horrible. The way we're treated, it's horrible. And then Washington Post adds, it was unclear what he was talking about. Yeah. Does anyone know what the hell this maniac's talking about? How is that related to the trade surplus with China or your lies to other foreign leaders? This guy's in charge of the country. Luckily, not for long. Okay, we're moving. A last story for you guys. I promised this to you yesterday. This is a doozy. Okay. Really interesting article in Washington Post from a professor at Yale University, John Bart. Now, he did a study with fellow researchers. It's going to be in the new issue of European Journal of Social Psychology. But in this article, he talks about some things that scientists knew before and then gets to the study and what they learned recently. And this is about how conservatives and liberals think differently. In fact, our brains are wired a little bit differently. This is really interesting, and it helps you figure out what motivates conservatives in this case. So he explains, over a decade now of research in political psychology consistently shows that how physically threatened or fearful a person feels is a key factor, although clearly not the only one, in whether he or she holds conservative or liberal attitudes. That's fascinating. So it turns out whether you're more afraid or not is going to determine whether you're a conservative or liberal. Now, conservatives are pretty good at marketing, so they've said all along, liberals are wimps and they're pushovers, and conservatives are strong. Now let's find out if that's true. Conservatives, it turns out, react more strongly to physical threat than liberals do. In fact, their greater concern with physical safety seems to be determined early in life. And this is amazing, listen to this. In one University of California study, the more fear a 4-year-old showed in a laboratory situation, the more conservative his or her political attitudes were found to be 20 years later. Turns out conservatives are hardwired to be afraid. So the people who are more fearful wind up becoming conservative. And when you think about it, it makes all the sense in the world. What is the primary motivation for conservatives? I'm afraid of immigrants. I'm afraid of terrorism. I'm afraid of crime. I'm afraid of drugs. I'm afraid of the God upstairs. I'm afraid of everything. They're driven by fear. Oh, the gays, I'm so afraid of them. I need my gun, I'm so afraid, I'm afraid. Everything is fear, fear, fear. Listen to this, brain imaging studies have even shown that the fear center of the brain, the amygdala, is actually larger in conservatives than in liberals. So if you're not into a conservative, have a little bit of sympathy for them. Their brain is actually structured so that they're constantly afraid. Now, it's a little different, and I don't want to overgeneralize, but the studies have borne it out, and on average, this is the conservative mind. So look, you can look at it two ways. One is, well, no wonder they're cowards. The other way you could look at it as a liberal and a progressive is our poor brothers and sisters. They can't help it. They were born with a different brain that makes them afraid of everything. By the way, step one in recovery is knowing what's wrong with you. And so conservatives, I'm here to help you. Politicians take advantage of an innate fear that you have to drive you to the wrong conclusions. So for example, you're worried about that the rules have been rigged against you. That you're right about. Liberals are worried about it, conservatives are worried about it. That actually is logical. Now, who do you think rigged them? Republicans will take advantage of your fear and say, it's the immigrants, the dirty immigrants coming into the country. Some of them are criminals and rapists, you gotta watch out. Wait a minute, the guy who just crossed the border from Mexico with nothing, who's gonna work his ass off to try to scrape together a little bit of money to send back to his family, that's the guy who rigged the rules? How in the world could he do that? He has no power. Don't look down, look up. They manipulate your fear to take advantage of you and lead you in the wrong direction. Now, the details of the study that they did is also fascinating. So listen to this. They were trying to see, can you push conservatives to be more progressive depending on the situation at hand? So they explain now. And there were a number of researchers here, it's just Professor Barg writing about it in this case. But before, so they asked them a bunch of questions, but before they answered the survey questions, we had them engage in an intense imagination exercise. They were asked to close their eyes and richly imagine being visited by a genie who granted them a superpower. For half of our participants, this superpower was to be able to fly under one's own power. For the other half, it was to be completely physically safe, invulnerable to any harm. If they had just imagined being able to fly, their responses to social attitude survey showed the usual clear difference between Republicans and Democrats. The former endorsed more conservative positions on social issues and were also more resistant to social change in general. But if they had instead just imagined being completely physically safe, the Republicans became significantly more liberal. Their positions on social attitudes were much more like the Democratic respondents. And on the issue of social change in general, the Republicans' attitudes were now indistinguishable from the Democrats. That's amazing. As long as you get a conservative to feel safe, he actually has the same positions as a progressive. So more details on this. Imagining being completely safe from physical harm had done what no experiment had done before. It had turned conservatives into liberals. Look, I said this on an earlier show, and I had seen similar studies to this before, and that's what I base it on. This is just an amazing new one that buttresses the point, that the number one thing that drives conservatives is fear, and people objected and said, no, hatred, etc. No, it's not the hatred nearly as much as the fear. It's the fear that gets them to go, I'm scared of the others, it must be the others. And what do the politicians do? They feed into that. The Southern strategy, the anti-immigrant stand, the anti-Muslim stand, they're coming to get you, the Sharia law is gonna take over Oklahoma. I mean, that is so preposterous, but it is designed to trigger the conservative mind into more fear and hence voting Republican. Okay, now in fact, anti-immigration attitudes, Professor Barg explains, are also linked directly to the underlying basic drive for physical safety. For centuries, arch conservative leaders have often referred to scapegoated minority groups as, quote, germs or, quote, bacteria that seek to invade and destroy the country from within. And you study any history and you'll see that that's exactly right, and it happens all across the world. We reasoned making people feel safer about a dangerous flu virus should serve to calm their fears about immigrants. And making them feel more threatened by the flu virus should cause them to be more against immigration than they were before. In a 2011 study, my colleagues and I showed just that. First, we reminded our nationwide sample of liberals and conservatives about the threat of the flu virus during the H1N1 epidemic, and then measured their attitudes toward immigration. Afterward, we simply asked them if they'd already gotten their flu shot or not. It turned out that those who had not gotten a flu shot, feeling threatened, expressed more negative attitudes towards immigration, while those who had received the vaccination, feeling safe, had more positive attitudes about immigration. Now, my favorite is the final part of the study, or the final study in this situation. In another study, using hand sanitizer after being warned about the flu virus had the same effect on immigration attitudes as had being vaccinated. A simple squirt of Purell after we had raised the threat of the flu had changed their minds. It made them feel safe from the dangerous virus, and this made them feel socially safe from immigrants as well. It's amazing how the human mind works. A little bit of Purell, and all of a sudden they're like, immigrants aren't so bad. A lot of this stuff is not thought consciously. Of course not. A conservative doesn't get a little bit of hand sanitizer and go, that's it, I'm a liberal now. He doesn't consciously think that, but subconsciously, that is the effect that it has. Amazing. So I think that if we want to have more advancement and more important than anything else, rational decision making in our government, what we need to do is take the fear out. Take the money out, but we also need to take the fear out. And if you do it, and if you expose the Republican tricks to try to lead people in the wrong direction, I think you'll be shocked at what a percentage of the country becomes more and more progressive. So at least now you know, and that's the beginning of fixing the problem. All right, I got to take a break here. When we come back, amazing story. Speaking of fear, a conservative who is a white nationalist got cucked by another white nationalist, and then madness and chaos ensued. It's a hilarious story. You'll love that when we come back. I know what you're thinking.
I love how you do something with your lips when you play the sound clips.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Look at his lips.
I was a woman.
No, you're closing your mouth. Usually I'll be like, and I'm like, is he like lip syncing it?
I don't know. I never noticed it until you said it.
It's a funny habit.
It's not human intelligence!
TYT member.
They're kicking me out the door. They're kicking me out the door.
Aaron, which one do you like better? What is this? Or what is this? Go.
All right, well, the Young Turks special election day coverage dropping.
An amazing power panel.
Look at this panel. You want to talk about power?
Like a smart Destiny's Child.
We're all too strong.
We start a revolution. Yes, another one.
Aren't you excited?
Wow.
Some of the best writers in the country are right here on this panel, with the obvious exception of John Irola.
Let's not so quickly discount Harry Potter fan fiction.
We have elected the top Twitter troll in the country.
What ran me away from Christianity was judgment and condemnation.
Assaulting peaceful protesters in North Dakota, crazier than bombing Yemen, crazier than bombing Syria so much they ran out of bombs.
Reductive interpretation of what their motives are, what Putin's are, by these amateur experts is just beyond.
We don't kill our journalists, and they do.
Back on a Young Turks, Cenk and Anna with you guys. Stacy Kisder writes in, only a few things make me happier than meeting new people and learning that they're Young Turks fans. I love that too. And guys, you'll be really surprised at how many conversations you start and how many friends you make if you wear Young Turks shirts. I'm not kidding. Obviously, we're biased because we want you to buy the shirts, shoptyt.com. But it happens all the time, and not just to me because I'm the host of the show, but and I get those stories all the time.
Is that a new jacket?
No.
No? Okay.
It said it's paired with the pink shirt.
Is that shirt intentionally pink, or was it washed with like a red shirt? And it was, because I can't tell. It's nice, it's nice, I like it. It just looks like it might have been a white shirt that turned pink. It's great, it looks beautiful.
Okay, all right, yeah. Anyways, no, it is an intentionally pink shirt. Okay. Chris Allen says, so the conservatives really are the true snowflakes. Well, it is in a lot of ways. I'm gonna go to YouTube Super Chat. Kai Salis writes in, and he doesn't agree with us. Apparently he's a conservative. He says, and liberals like chunky yogurt are afraid of mean words and quote, unsafe spaces, typical liberal hypocrisy. Well, Kai, keep watching because that's not remotely true. We talk about it all the time on the show. We believe the conservatives should speak on college campuses. And what do I say in every one of those stories?
Yep.
Who cares? We're not afraid of them. Just let them say whatever they're gonna say and have 7 people like Kai listen. It's irrelevant. And then have a progressive speak and we'll crush them. So anyway, but good to have you as part of the program. Brent Feast says you should do a segment every day that shows an updating list on how many times each Democrat in Congress has voted with the Republicans. Good point, Brent. Derelict 0, these are all on YouTube Super Chat. That helps the show. So fun fact, Cenk, in Canadian French, cut, cut, cut is the sound of a singing chicken. So that's what Trump was accidentally saying. And Evil Naughty Smurfette, which is an excellent name, says fear and ignorance go together way too often. Indeed, Evil Smurfette. Okay, now, Anna.
All right. The Trump administration is finalizing their plan to combat the opioid epidemic, and it turns out that there's a little bit of infighting between the Department of Justice and Health and Human Services. Now, they're coming at it from 2 different approaches, which is why the legislation that's being proposed by the Trump administration has some relatively good components, but some pretty bad proposals as well. Now, to be sure, the legislation is not finalized, nothing has been released yet. However, Politico did get its hands on a version of the legislation, and here's what we know so far. First, I always want to talk about the severity of this epidemic because the numbers are mind-boggling. So there were more than 64,000 drug overdose deaths in 2016. Emergency rooms recorded a 30% spike in opioid overdoses last summer, indicating that the devastating crisis is actually worsening. It is not getting better. So there is a lot of urgency when it comes to dealing with this. And remember, Trump said that he would deal with it immediately after coming to office, and that is not what he has done. Now, here's what he is potentially going to propose. Trump is finalizing a plan that calls for law enforcement measures like the death penalty for some drug dealers that public health advocates and congressional Republicans warn will detract from efforts to reverse the epidemic. So the law enforcement component of the proposal obviously comes from the Department of Justice. They want to really beef up the war on drugs, and their idea is punitive measures. Punitive measures, that's the way to go, even though we've had decades of failed policy involving the war on drugs. Now, it does also include prevention and treatment measures, and those are the components that come from Health and Human Services. So that's where you see a little bit of a divide when it comes to the Trump administration. Yeah, so actually there are good parts of this bill. In fact, there's parts that are so good in treating people with opioid addictions that they think it's totally unrealistic that Congress will pass a bill that large. Because conservatives will want to kill it. They'll say, no, it's deficit spending, which they didn't mind when they were passing the trillions of dollars in tax cuts for the rich. But anyway, in this case, they say it's unlikely to pass. And the amount of money that Trump himself has allocated is wildly unrealistic, given the scope, not just the scope of the problem, but the scope of the proposed solutions, the positive ones coming from the health community, okay? And then, of course, I'm amused by the Justice Department guys like, no, you know what we'll do? We'll break them. Yeah, that'll show them. No, they're already broken. They're addicted. We're trying to help them. Right. But all you have is a hammer, everything seems like nails. Like, no, you don't have to hammer these guys. They're in trouble. You need
You need to help them.
Well, remember, the reason why the war on drugs continues till this day, and the reason why there's still a federal prohibition on relatively harmless drugs like marijuana is because people have made careers off of the prohibition of it. So those are the very people that are employed by the Department of Justice, which is why they want to come at it from a more draconian and punitive perspective. Now, let's give you some more details on this. The Trump administration proposes to change how the government pays for opioid prescriptions to limit access to powerful painkillers. It also calls on Congress to change how Medicaid pays for treatment, seeking to make it easier for patients with addictions to get inpatient care. It would also create a new Justice Department task force that more aggressively monitors internet sales. Now remember, we've talked about that task force before, and Kellyanne Conway is likely to be the head of that task force, even though she has no experience with it. But nonetheless, there are the good components that would help those with addiction. They would take some preventative measures, and also they would expand access to naloxone, which is the drug that first responders can give to someone as they're overdosing on prescription painkillers or heroin.
So that should, of course, be readily available to all the first responders. So it's about time they did that. That's great. And I want to actually even compliment one part from the Justice Department proposal. They'd be empowered to step up prosecutions of criminally negligent doctors, pharmacies, and other providers. But let's note that there is one really important part of that is missing. In fact, the most important part. Prosecutors would not be encouraged or empowered to go after the biggest drug dealers, which are the pharmaceutical companies and their distributors. They're the ones selling the drugs to the pill mills in the first place. They're the ones that know that a tidal wave of opioids went into West Virginia that all the people in West Virginia couldn't possibly take in over a decade. They know exactly where their drugs are going. They're literally the drug dealers, but they're the only ones who aren't going to be touched at all.
Right, I think it's interesting that they don't want to approach the root of the problem, and they want to go after the pharmacists and the doctors. And look, there are definitely bad actors, who are pharmacists and doctors, but that's not the root of the problem. And there was a lot of tough talk by Trump during the election in regard to these pharmaceutical companies, and he has done nothing to rein them in.
So it actually leads to two other things, right? So first of all, 64,000 drug deaths is, we talked about, and continue to talk about because it's amazing. It's brought down the life expectancy of the average American by itself. That's how many deaths there are related to opioids. So we're losing years of our lives because of this abuse on average, okay? So Trump said he was gonna stop opioid abuse, period. So under this proposal, if it works perfectly, they say that it'll eventually get rid of a third of the problem. What happened? I thought he was gonna fix it overnight.
Period.
Yeah, look, what a preposterous set of lies that he told during the campaign and that people believed. So now, but he's had over a year to do something about it. Why is the proposal coming all like 14 months later? But okay, fine. So what happened in that year? Because Trump's magically gonna solve everything, right? Well, it turns out that the CDC reported just last week that the emergency rooms recorded a 30% spike in opioid overdoses last summer. So it got 30% worse under Trump. Because he sat on his hands and didn't do anything for over a year. Now he does this proposal. Some parts are good, some parts are clearly deficient, some parts are preposterous. So now let's get to executing the drug dealers. So even deeply Republican senators like Shelley Moore Capito in West Virginia say, no, that doesn't make any sense. She said, I don't see that's going to solve the problem. Right. And West Virginia's hit the hardest, and he won that state by I think 49 points. And the Republican senator from there is, no, dumbass, executing the drug dealers. What are you gonna do? Go execute the CEO of Purdue Pharma?
That's right. That isn't gonna solve the problem, because the problem isn't some shady drug dealer standing on a dark street corner somewhere. It is, this system that we have set up with the pharmaceutical industry and its cozy ties to doctors. Some of these trips that they take these doctors on, how they persuade these doctors to overprescribe some of these incredibly addictive drugs. I mean, that is the heart of the problem. What is he gonna do? He's gonna execute the pharmaceutical CEOs? Of Of course he's not. So it's just a nonsense, I'm tough on crime stance that isn't gonna materialize into anything beneficial. But I do wanna give you a quote from Trump and then give you the reality of how he's helped black market drug dealers in the past. So he said in regard to executing drug dealers recently, if you shoot one person, they give you life, meaning life in prison. They give you the death penalty. These people can kill 2,000, 3,000 people and nothing happens to them. Well, first of all, a lot of them do get caught and they do spend a lot of time behind bars. But what is the reality when it comes to Trump and drug dealers? Well, according to the Daily Beast, back in the 1980s, Trump helped a multi-kilo cocaine dealer escape with a minimal sentence. A little over a decade ago, Trump worked with a convicted pill pusher, this is another drug dealer, pill pusher to develop Trump Tower Philadelphia, a real estate deal that also involved Don Jr. and Ivanka. So I'll give you more details on who those drug dealers are. But when it came to one of these dealers, he literally wrote a letter to the judge in order to give this individual a minimal sentence and referred to this person as a good member of society, a credit to the community, conscientious, forthright, and diligent. Because it was one of his buddies. It was someone that he was doing deals with. So when it comes to that, no, doesn't care about being tough on crime.
And this is not, hey, a guy got caught with a couple of joints on the street and they say, oh, you were gonna deal it to your friends. No, he brought in tons of ecstasy from Belgium and then he did it over and over again and he brought in different kinds of drugs. He was a drug dealer.
Yes.
But he was rich and he had come from a rich family. So Trump's like, as long as you're rich, what do I care? And so they were going to do Trump Tower together in Philadelphia. And he's like, well, he's a swell guy. Now, but if it's a poor drug dealer, let's execute the son of a bitch, okay? The other guy from the 1980s, he also had to deal with, they used to use his helicopters.
That's
he
right.
also stayed in Trump Tower in New York. And they would use his helicopters to bring people to his Trump's Atlantic City casinos. So then he writes a glowing letter. And that guy's case got moved from Cincinnati for no reason to New Jersey, and guess who the judge was? Donald Trump's sister.
It was Donald, but then later she did recuse herself to her credit, but.
No, only when they found out that she was also using the helicopters.
That's right.
Then she had to recuse herself, then they handed it off to a friend of hers in that same court, and of course the guy got a lenient sentence.
Yeah, served only 18 months and then was released to a halfway house.
In one of these cases, the drug dealer himself got, at the end of everything, finally 3 years after constantly violating the law. The people lower on the chain got 20 years. Why? Because they weren't rich. It's sick, it's absolutely sick. And as usual, the same thing with him when he uses illegal immigrants on his buildings, when he brings in more immigrants today, even when he's president, with visas, foreign workers, when he's railing against it, all of his products are made outside of the country. He had another case of hypocrisy. He says, execute the drug dealers, but not my buddies who are drug dealers who I love.
I mean, look, he bragged about lying to Justin Trudeau. What makes anyone think that he wouldn't lie to the American people just to get their votes?
Of course, and then finally, Senator Dan Sullivan, another right-wing Republican, this time from Alaska, when asked, you guys really gonna vote to execute drug dealers? He said, quote, I don't know if the president was serious or just said it off the cuff. In other words, even the Republican senators are like, look, the guy's a joker. You want me to take him seriously? But it turns out he is serious. It's in the actual proposal. So now they're gonna have to vote on whether to execute drug dealers. And if we have to bother telling you, we will. All the research shows that in other countries where they've tried execution as a way of stopping the demand for drugs and the amount of drugs that are in the country, it has never worked.
We got to take a break. When we come back, Tucker Carlson talks about how March should be Men's Month, not necessarily Women's Month.
No. Poor men. We'll talk about it when we come back. right, back on the Young Turks. Members of the day are Adrian Delgado and Sarah Householder. Great name. Today in the post game, I'm going to do the UFO story that I've been dying to do for the last couple of days. They're here. Just keep it real. They're here. We have video evidence. I want to show it to you. We do. We have evidence. And then in Rebel headquarters, I get a heartwarming story in a race that a Just Democrat lost. But nonetheless, it was heartwarming. So that's really interesting. And then aggressive progressives, of course, for members as well. So tytnetwork.com/join to become a member. And just time for one tweet for you. Jeff Waldorf writes in, if Trump executes the drug dealers, where is Larry Kudlow going to get his fix? Okay, that was in the past, guys. Okay, all right, what's next?
All right. March typically celebrates women, known as Women's Month. However, Tucker Carlson feels like he needs to take over the month and represent some of the issues that men are facing today. Now, it's a multi-part series that Carlson is focusing on, and in the latest video, he discusses the issue of wages that men earn versus women. I don't want to give too much away. Let's take a look at the first video.
One well-regarded study released last year found that when men's wages fell relative to women's, families didn't form. According to the authors, a falling male wage reduced, quote, the attractiveness of men as potential spouses, thus reducing fertility and especially marriage rates. Researchers also noted a dramatic increase in out-of-wedlock births when men made less. In the words of one of the authors, an economics professor at MIT, quote, we see a decline in fertility, a decline in marriage, but a rise in the fraction of births that are disadvantaged. As a consequence, the kids are living in pretty tough circumstances. Numerous academic studies have reached the very same conclusion. Research from 2015 found that, quote, when a randomly chosen woman becomes more likely to earn more than a randomly chosen man, marriage rates decline. Those who do marry report being less satisfied and are more likely to divorce. Low male wages are a driving force in family dissolution, and that's why affluent neighborhoods in which men make more have a higher proportion of married couples and fewer divorces. The opposite is also true, and that leads to a cascade of social problems, which over time become a disaster. Men who make lower wages marry less and father more children out of wedlock. These children growing up without fathers tend to make lower wages themselves in later life.
Okay, so I watched the full segment, which we don't have time to show you on our show. And he keeps referencing academic research from 2015. And he never states where the research is from, who did the research. The only time he referenced research was a study done by MIT, which actually did have some fascinating results, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But he twisted the results of that study to suit his narrative. Right, so he made it seem as though society is really screwing men over. Women are getting paid a lot more now, and as a result, it's destroying the sanctity of marriage. And in that same video that we just showed you, he talked about how men earning less leads to lower fertility, but increases the number of children born out of wedlock. Does he know what fertility is? Because that kind of contradicts the message, whatever message he's trying to spread.
Okay, no, but it's funny. I'm sure the conservatives took away from it what you saw there and what he intended. But as a progressive, as I looked at that, I thought, like, okay, so you say men are making less than women in some cases, and that's making men feel bad and make them seem less attractive to women. So what are we supposed to do about it? Knock down women's wages? Well, why don't men just step up their game? I mean, for my whole life, conservatives have gone around saying, take personal responsibility, pick yourself up by the bootstrap. Now that men, in some rare cases, or not even rare, in limited cases, certain professions and et cetera, right, are making less money, why don't we throw the same bootstraps at the guys?
No, you just made a great point. And the MIT study focuses, a component of that focuses on the point that you just made right now, okay? Because there are jobs that were typically male dominated that are now disappearing because of automation, because of competition from and outsourcing to China and other countries. And so it's a legitimate concern, but there's also the issue of the types of jobs men are and are not willing to take. And we'll get to that in a minute, but I first want to toss to the second video. Let's take a look.
What's striking is how little notice these facts get from our policymakers. Their overriding aim is to raise women's wages to parity or above men's. There's nothing inherently wrong with that, but these are complex questions with numerous and profound unintended consequences, so they deserve a vigorous public debate. It's notable that most women, the very population on whose behalf these policies are supposedly devised, strongly prefer to marry men who make more than they do. But what's beyond debate is that Washington and corporate America aren't thinking a lot about how to solve the male wage crisis. If anything, they're exacerbating it. Lawmakers in both parties, for example, have heartily embraced self-driving vehicles and drone delivery of packages. It's all impressive technology, but what would be the effect on employment? Has anyone asked that?
Okay, so there are kernels of truth to what he's saying there, right?
Yeah. So I actually want to give him credit for an earlier segment that he did on the same men's issue in a second, because some of the stuff that he says is true, but then he gives an analysis on it that's twisted, right? So let me break down the deceptive tactics he used in those two clips. In the earlier clip, he talked about, now in the affluent neighborhoods, they stay together more, and that's because the men are making more. No, wait, that's not what the study shows. It doesn't show it's because the men are making more. It's because they have more money, hence less strife. So a lot of times couples fight over limited resources. It's the fact that the household has more money, not that men have more money than women. So you totally twisted that. So secondly, in that case, in the second clip, he said, now a lot of lawmakers are pushing that women get the same amount of money or more than men. Wait, who's pushing for that? I've literally never seen anyone say, no, women should make more than men. No one has ever said that.
So that wasn't a mistake. That was an intentional, little message that he snuck in there, because the reality is there is this fear among some, usually on the right wing, that women are fighting to be more powerful than men, to make more than men, when in reality they want equality. And I'm talking about equality of opportunities, okay? No one wants anything handed to them. We just want equality of opportunities. If we are working the same job, then we deserve the same pay. And they will take that message and twist it to essentially pit men against women on this issue that everyone should be behind. Because guess what? Men and women get married. You have a dual income household. The more money and the more resources that household has, the more successful that household will be. And so it's just weird. It's a contradiction after contradiction in his messaging.
And that leads to one more deception that he had in that second video. He said, they say that they want women to make the same amount of money as men or more, but did you know that women prefer to marry men who are making more than them? Wait, those two things are not logically connected. So just because women would like to marry someone who also has money or even more money than them, because then the household would have more money, that doesn't mean that they would like to make less money unfairly, right? Those things are not logically connected. They'd like to be able to get paid for what they're worth and get paid at the same rate as men. And they'd also like to marry someone who has more money so they can feel more comfortable, which every person does.
No, but again, there's a contradiction there, right? Women want to make more money than men. Women want to marry men that make more money than them. What?
In other words, humans like to have money because it makes life a little bit better. But that doesn't mean that women want to get paid less. And that seems to be what he's implying. Women, they want men who make more money than them, so it's okay if we pay them less. It's those subtle little deceptions.
So let's get to the one study that he actually did cite in making his argument. And again, there are kernels of truth in what he is saying. There are certain blue collar workers who have lost their jobs in manufacturing for a variety of reasons, but women are not making significantly more money than those men did. In fact, women typically work in professions that pay significantly less, which is the reason why men are less likely and less willing to transition to those professions. Let me give you those details. So the two occupations predicted by the Bureau of Labor Statistics to decline the most quickly from 2014 to 2024 are locomotive firers, shrinking 70%, and vehicle electronics installers and repairers, down 50%. They are 96% and 96% and 98% male. Of the fastest growing jobs, many are various types of health aides, which are about 90% female. When men take these so-called pink collar jobs, they have more job security and wage growth than in blue collar work, according to recent research. But they are paid less and feel stigmatized. So the MIT economist that Tucker Carlson referenced in that piece or in that segment said the following. This is his quote. "The jobs being created are very different than the jobs being eliminated. I'm not worried about whether there will be jobs. I'm very worried about whether there will be jobs for low-educated adults, especially the males who seem very reluctant to take the new jobs." So here's an example of one man who was interviewed by the New York Times. He said the following, "I ain't gonna be a nurse. I don't have the tolerance for people. I don't want it to sound bad, but I've always seen a woman in the position of a nurse or some kind of healthcare worker. I see it as more of a woman's touch." So a sociologist who was also interviewed by the Times said traditional masculinity is standing in the way of working class men's employment, and I think it's a problem. So there is a cultural issue, and there's also an education issue, because the very party that continues to dismantle education, defund education, and also give it a bad name with all sorts of defamatory statements in regard to elitism are convincing people to not pursue their education and remain low skilled. And yes, automation is happening. There is nothing we can do to stop that. We're not gonna get rid of technology. It will continue to advance, and our only fight against that is to continue educating Americans for higher paying, high skilled jobs.
So last week he did a similar segment about men in America, and it was like poor men. So a lot of people made fun of it, and I did too a little bit, because he was blaming feminists, and that's preposterous. But when I watched the whole segment, I decided not to do a story on it, because a lot of the stuff he was saying was okay. It's just his interpretation was wrong. So for example, he pointed out that women are getting educated at greater rates, and they're going deeper into education, getting more masters, more doctorate degrees, more lawyers, doctors, etc. So I see that same issue, and it's real, that's true. And I don't think damn feminists or, oh my God, our culture made men worse or somehow unnaturally bolstered women. I think, no, women are doing a good job of getting educated. Now, what we need to do is to help our brothers realize that you should get an education too. You know, you could also do better, and we should push men in our society to be, if you will, stronger and smarter. And I don't mean in terms of IQ, I mean in terms of making the right decisions. I'm also a man, so and as progressives, you know what we want? We want equality. That's it, equality. We don't want women to make more. We don't want women to be above men. We want women to have the equality of opportunity that men do, but we also want men to have that same equality of opportunity. So yes, men in America are in some cases falling behind. Education, retraining, these things, those parts are true. But the prescription to that is not to blame feminists and the culture. The prescription is to actually help men get beyond those problems, get more of an education, get more acclimated to the new economy, and hence make more money, so the whole country will be better off.
We have to take one more break. When we come back, a catastrophe of a story. You don't want to miss it.
All right. All right, back on the Young Turks. In the postgame, we'll talk about UFOs and Anna's report card from elementary school, which is super fun and will lead to a rant of mine about elementary school today. tytnetwork.com/join to become a member. What's next, Anna?
All right. The Traditionalist Worker Party, a white nationalist group in the United States, is no more following infidelity and a physical altercation between the leader and the spokesperson for the group. Now, the leader, Matthew Heimbach, was arrested Tuesday for allegedly assaulting his wife and his spokesman after Heimbach was caught cheating on his wife with the spokesman's wife. So David Matt Parrott was the party's spokesperson until Tuesday when he quit in a statement to the Southern Poverty Law Center. Parrott's wife, Jessica, was allegedly having an affair with Heimbach, who is married to Parrott's stepdaughter from a previous marriage. All sorts of twists and turns, all sorts of drama. Since the story is so complicated, we decided to do a reenactment for you guys so you can visualize the drama. Take a look. Parrott and Heimbach arranged to set up Heimbach and Jessica in a trailer on Parrott's property to catch them having sex. But the box broke under Parrott's weight. Parrott entered the trailer. But that's when Heimbach allegedly choked him. Parrott threw a chair at him. Heimbach hit back, choking him into unconsciousness. Parrott fled to a Walmart near his home and called police around 1 a.m.
Okay, there's so many wonderful parts of this story. So first of all, one white nationalist cuckolding another white nationalist.
I mean,
all right, we're already like in news heaven. Okay, all right. Number two is the Heimbach, who was, by the way, one of the organizers of the Charlottesville rally and assaulted someone at a Trump rally and is
a young black woman.
A young black woman, of course. He's a white nationalist. He's in trouble for that. Was sleeping with, in essence, his mother-in-law.
Yeah.
It's so weird that a white nationalist would do something that scummy. And the mother-in-law, also a white nationalist, it's like, oh, let me sleep with my stepdaughter. It's my stepdaughter who also married a white nationalist. Let me sleep with her husband. Like, this is like a who's who of terrible people.
It's insane. So the cops arrived to Heimbach's home to question him because, as you know, Parrott called the cops and reported what was going on. Now, Heimbach, again, is already in trouble because of the fact that he assaulted an African-American woman at a Trump rally. And because of this, he might actually serve time in jail. But he was charged with assault as a result. And he assaulted his own wife when the police showed up. He essentially told his wife, I don't want to talk to them. Go tell them that everything's okay and there's no problem. But remember, she's getting cheated on too. She's angry. And so a scuffle ensues between those two. And the cops ended up arresting him because they could hear that things had gotten incredibly physical with his own wife.
He grabbed her head, threw her down, made her bleed, and apparently she has recording of all of it. So he's in a world of trouble there. Back to Parrott. He writes to the Southern Poverty Law Center, who's been tracking these guys all along. I'm done, I'm out. SPLC is won. Matt Parrott is out of the game. You all have a nice life. That's the same genius who thought it was a good idea. Hey, we'll catch him by just looking in the window. And then they're like, hey, look, the guy's in the window.
By the way, he referred to this whole debacle as a white trash circus.
A catastrophe indeed. Bye-bye. All right, welcome to Rebel Headquarters. I got 2 great interviews for you guys, but I also have a story for you. And don't forget, if you want to suggest guests or topics for the show, rebelhq@tytnetwork.com. Send us an email there. Okay, so in Texas, there were primaries recently. We covered them on the Young Turks, and there were 7 Just Democrats who were running. One of them was Derek Crow. I interviewed him on this program at Rebel Headquarters. And he's a great candidate, really progressive. He's in the 21st district. And we were rooting for him that night, but it turns out he lost. He came in 3rd, and it was a spirited contest in the 21st district. And the person who people thought was gonna win was Joseph Kopser. He'd raised a lot of money. He, turns out, did not win. He came in 2nd. Now, there's runoffs in Texas, so if you get into the top 2 and nobody's got 50%, they go to the runoff. So Derek Crow came in 3rd, and so he's out of the race now. We're gonna get back to Derek in a second. But so who won? Was it an establishment Democrat, one with a lot of money that the National Democrats were supporting? No, turns out it was another wonderful progressive. Her name is Mary Street Wilson. She was the candidate in the 21st district along with Derek. They're both progressives. Isn't that wonderful? And you have a primary between 2 progressives, and then of course there is an establishment guy. But Mary Wilson, a former math teacher running for Congressional District 21, raised a measly $40,000 over the last year, according to the Texas Observer. Now that's not a lot of money to run in a congressional race. That's a US Congress seat. But she won anyway. She beat the establishment guy by over 1,000 votes. In comparison, Joseph Kopser raised about $770,000, received a slew of endorsements and a ton of press coverage, and came in 2nd anyway. So Kopser and Mary Wilson will go to a runoff in Texas. We'll find Mary's links because we're not connected to her, but we'll put them down below to donate, to volunteer, etc. And they asked her, you know, you did this incredible upset. How do you feel? She just says, this is so cute. She's like, wow, it's pretty exciting. So it is indeed. And I wanted to give you a quote from the Observer because the main thing I was curious about is how'd she do it? So she was aided by many volunteers who spent time knocking on doors and making calls. In the early days of campaigning, she says she spent time talking to voters and showed up to every event organized by local Democratic groups. I told you, it's the volunteers, it's the knocking on doors. So go out there and volunteer, whether it's for Mary Wilson in the 21st district in Texas, or any other progressive candidate wherever you are. AllisonHartson.com/now if you care about the California race against Feinstein. But there's a million races. Find who's in your neck of the woods, who's the real progressive, because volunteering makes all the difference. Wonderful, heartwarming story, but it has an even equally great ending here. So Derek Crow was also a great progressive candidate, but he came in 3rd, he lost, he's not in the runoff. So is he going to be bitter about that? How's he going to react? Because I hear from the establishment candidates that progressives don't want to unite. Well, let's find out what Derek did, because this is the video he made right after the election.
We had what I think is fair to characterize as a stunning upset victory last night. Mary Wilson pulled off a victory that I think she should be enormously proud of. If you haven't looked at the vote totals yet, Mary Wilson actually came up ahead, the top vote getter in the congressional race. Mary spent, as of the FEC reports I saw this morning, as of February 15th, about $40,000 on a race that others were spending more than $600,000 on, and got more votes than anybody in the race. By any measure, that is a stunning victory for her. And I want to congratulate Mary publicly here for what she has done. As I told the crowd that was gathered last night for our watch party, although the result isn't what we wanted, obviously we wanted to win the plurality of the votes, and we didn't do that. There is a victory here, and the victory is that there's a sign that our elections can't be bought this year. Because Mary was able to win the plurality of the votes in the initial vote on a $40,000 budget, far below anything else anybody else spent in the race, and got the most votes. So congratulations, Mary. You deserve to be super proud right now, and I'm super proud for you. And that's why earlier this morning, I published an endorsement for Mary and sent it to the press.
That was the day after the election. That's classy. And you know what that is? That's unity. When you have progressives who are uncorrupted and don't take corporate cash, yes, we will most certainly stick together after the elections. So Mary Wilson, you go get them. Okay, now let's move on to our guests. We got Illinois primaries coming up next Tuesday. We'll of course be covering them live on the Young Turks, tytnetwork.com/live. Don't miss it, they're gonna be amazing. So now joining me is Amanda Howland. She's running for Congress in Illinois' 6th District. Amanda, welcome to the program, and tell me about your district. Tell me why you're running, and who the incumbent is, and how you plan to win this race.
Illinois' 6th Congressional District covers parts of 5 counties. We have a small part of Lake County, a chunk of McHenry County, a big piece of DuPage County, a small piece of Kane County, and then we have a little part of Cook County. So it was gerrymandered very nicely in the last decennial census. It's typically been a Republican district since 1976. But it is right now ready to flip. Last cycle, it was proven when we ran a campaign, I was asked to step up and run because I had name recognition. We ran a campaign on a budget of $130,000, and the DCCC and no one else thought that this was a seat that was in play, and yet we got 41% of the vote against what Peter Roskam spent, which was $3.3 million against me.
Wow.
So, and the thing that really made a big difference is what you were saying earlier, the grassroots, the volunteers, the people who came out, everything that we did with people who were not being paid for it. They were working because they cared about what was happening. I only had one full-time paid staff person, and that was from June of 2016 until November 2016 of the election day. So the rest of it was all volunteer, which was fantastic.
That is an amazing story. So having been outspent 30-1 and making a race of it anyway when people thought it was impossible, and organizing grassroots to do it. So now that you got a real shot in that district, have they cleared the field for you? Because I know the Democratic Party likes to clear the field in order to win elections.
No, as a matter of fact, if anything, the field has gotten bigger. When I announced last February of last year that I was going to be in the race a second time because Dick Durbin and others had told me you really need to run more than once in a race like this because you build your base the first cycle, and the second cycle is when you come after people and actually can win. And by May of last year, I had approximately 23 people who were considering challenging me in the primary. By the time we got to, it was crazy. By the time we got to filing our petitions in November, it was down to 6 people challenging me. And those people are still on the ballot. And of the 6 people, 5 of them are moving to the center and saying that we need to be centrists in order to win this district. And that's not what the polls showed in the last cycle. Bernie won this district overwhelmingly in the primary. And then Hillary, in the general, won it by 7 percentage points. So Trump wasn't even in play here. The only reason Peter Roskam won last time is because he's been in office long enough and he lives in the area and people think of him as a moderate. And they've seen this time around that he's not a moderate. He has aligned himself strictly with Trump. And he helped write this tax bill that just was shoved through. And that's got a lot of his supporters very angry right now.
Yeah, you know, I don't mind the 7 people in a primary. I believe in primaries, and that's okay. Bless their hearts, they run. But I'm with you. I don't believe that going to the middle is a winning strategy. There's this hilarious slogan in Kansas' 3rd district. There's a progressive, Brent Welder, there, and his opponent says the courage to compromise and leading from the middle. I've never heard that before, leading from the middle. That's hilarious. No. So Amanda, in your case, what's that?
I said you can't do that.
Yeah. In your case, how are you leading as a progressive?
I'm leading as a progressive because I'm the only one out there, other than the young man who is running for the very first time and has great credentials but needs a lot of experience. I'm the only one out there who is pushing for single-payer health care, who has backed it from the beginning and haven't changed my position, who is pushing for free public education and reducing student interest loan rates and trying to get at least 2 years of community college or technical school in line for being free for those who can qualify and who need that support. And I'm pushing for all of the other issues that Democrats hold dear, but I think the biggest one that differentiates me from the other candidates is the single payer. And I've run my campaign from the beginning saying that I am unapologetically progressive, and that progressive doesn't mean that you are so far left wing that you're a tax and spend liberal and giving everything away. What it means is this country's been going backwards for too long, and we need progress. We need to move forward. And that's what I'm running on.
Yeah, we got to break all those stereotypes. So one more policy question for you. What's your position on campaign finance reform?
I would immediately do away with campaign with Citizens United. I am a constitutional law attorney now. I'm a former special education teacher, was an elementary school administrator. I'm a trustee at a community college. I'm on the was board chairman there for 2 years. I'm on a national committee. And unless and until we get money out of politics, we're not going to be able to get through the programs that we need. That's prohibiting us from going to single payer because of the lobbyists that are spending money. That's prohibiting us from having some reasonable gun regulations because of the lobbyists that are spending all the money. Money is the problem in our elected officials right now, and until they do away with Citizens United, which I'm sure, knowing our Supreme Court, is not going to happen through them. So that means that Congress has to step up and push for a constitutional amendment.
All right, here on that. Amanda Howland, everybody check out the links here. Amanda Howland for Congress.com. We'll have all these links so you can donate or volunteer. And if you can't give the time, at least give small dollar donations to people running without corporate cash. And they'll be in the description box below on YouTube and the comment section on Facebook. Amanda, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Great. And we would love to have people take, even $10 helps. We're on TV now, we're on radio, and we're trying to keep those ads going through next Tuesday. So anything that people can contribute is terrific. I have not taken any corporate money. I have not taken any PAC money, and I don't have any big groups behind me. Although I have endorsements, I don't have all their money behind me because I've not taken that.
All right, thank you so much. Really appreciate it, and I appreciate running as a strong progressive too. All right, we're going to take a quick break here. When we come back, I've got another Illinois candidate for you guys because their elections are coming up right around the corner on Tuesday night, and we're going to cover those for you at the Young Turks as well. So we'll be right back. All right, back on Rebel headquarters. I want to check in on how we're doing with volunteers for Allison Hartson's campaign. Ooh, nice progress there. I like that. There was about 100 new volunteers in the last couple of days. So AllisonHartson.com/now to volunteer. AllisonHartson.com/now. She's running against Dianne Feinstein. Allison's going to come out with some devastating ads soon. I think you guys are going to love those. Get in the game. If you're in California, go ahead and get involved, knock on doors, go to events. Sometimes events are as simple as going to 3rd Street Promenade in Santa Monica and handing out literature. Just make one call. Becoming a volunteer takes 15 seconds. Making one call takes about at most a minute. And good enough, as long as you're in the game, and you don't have to be in California to be a volunteer. You don't have to be in California to make calls. AllisonHartson.com/now. Okay, let's go to our next interview here. Brian Dieters joins us. He's running Illinois' 18th district for United States Congress. Brian, great to have you on the program.
Hey, thanks a lot. What a great opportunity for us here in the middle of Illinois. So thanks.
Oh, no problem. So let's talk about your race. You're in a deeply Republican district. You got Darren LaHood, who's the incumbent there. So how's a very progressive guy like you going to win in a district that red?
It's happening everywhere, man. And that's really what's happening. Even here in what is certainly considered by a lot of strategists the reddest of red districts in the country. But the energy is real. I've been on a 19 counties in 19 days campaign. We have a vast district here in the middle of Illinois. And people, just regular people, are ready to make a difference. They're concerned about where we're at. And I'm just here really not as a politician, but as an educator. And I think it's resonating with people. They're willing to listen to what our message is about. And so we're excited. I mean, this can happen. This can happen even in a place that hasn't had a Democrat represented since the New Deal. So think about that. That's where we're at in this race.
Right. So Brian, as you go through all those counties, what are the issues that seem to be resonating the most with voters?
Healthcare, absolutely healthcare. The reality that we have a political system that's broken, and that's where I come in as somebody who's taught history and sociology for 23 years. I'm just having the conversation that we have this elitist model. It's a billionaire elitist model that's driving the agenda. It's driving our media. It's driving our legislation. People get it. And unfortunately, Darren LaHood is part of that broken system. He recently came out and said the tax bill is going to play in Peoria. And I'm talking to the people of Peoria and I'm talking to the people of the other areas of our district, and they're not buying it. So the energy is real. We've got indivisible groups popping up everywhere, from Bloomington to Peoria to Quincy and Macomb. So this blue wave can happen even here in this reddest of places. So Brian, when you talk about the elites, I'm curious what you mean by that. Like, who are the elites, and how do you think that they've broken the system, in using your words? Yeah, well, I think what I mean, the elites, I mean just this institution, this system, not individual people, but particularly since the 80s when we had this model where, corporations, special interests, let's talk about things like Citizens United, with campaign financing and the amount of money that can be funneled in for big oil. And so when you tie that to conglomerated media, what you have, as well as legislators that feel the pressure, what you have is this situation where this tax bill is a culmination of that, right? It's clearly something that is promoting the top 1%. It's trying to be advocated through, Koch brother type media efforts, millions and millions of dollars to say Tom, Dick, and Harry are getting a share of this. But I'm telling you, people aren't buying it. Well, the polls seem to indicate that, and they weren't buying it in Pennsylvania's 18th district. We saw that. And I don't mean just generally because Conor Lamb won and Rick Scone lost. No, the Republicans stopped running ads on the tax cuts because they found that they were starting to be counterproductive. People wanted to vote for them less. Absolutely. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. And so I'm not surprised that that would happen in your district too. That was a district that Trump had won by 20 points, and the Republicans lost it. So now you have video on YouTube called "A Time to Heal."
what's in that video and what does that mean?
So really my reason for getting into this race is as one of a concerned citizen, a concerned teacher, and probably mostly a concerned father. And so since I've taught sociology, since I've had this very extraordinary opportunity of teaching in the district for as long as I have, but teaching at an international school, I've kind of been in tune to this fact that we all as people all over the world, and certainly in the US and certainly in this district, have way more in common. And I want to focus on that. So my agenda is more cultural, but as I said, it's resonating with people. You know, when you talk about people want security, people want education, people want health. And if you just talk about those things and you keep it in that context, there's ears listening. And as I said, I've gone on to this 19 days and 19 counties in 19 days campaign. It's been something that's even made it more aware to me that people are definitely ready to come together. This is a district that votes in the past 2016, 72-28. LaHood won. Aaron Schock, that's from this district, the congressman who had a lot of issues, was 75-25. So it's deep red, but I just feel the energy, and I know that this is something that can happen come November. So a time to heal just means people are tired of the divide, regardless if they lean left, if they lean right. They're just people in this district are independent-minded and kind-hearted people, and they're tired of the divide.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think your idea of running against the elites is actually a good one. I think the Republican voters understand the system is broken or rigged, however you want to frame it, as much as progressive voters do. And I think that you're right that the crux of the problem is they're all serving their donors. So that's what's breaking it in the first place. So I'm not surprised that message would resonate in any district. One more thing though, you brought up that you were a teacher for 23 years a couple of times, and you talk about a crisis in education. What do you mean by that? What's the crisis?
People are leaving the profession in droves. I mean, to me, this is the biggest thing that I actually think I can bring to the table. Education is the pillar of our democracy. The public model of education particularly, I mean, look at the Betsy DeVos interview in 60 Minutes just the other day, right? Mm-hmm. There's obviously a push to get away from the public model. There are schools in our district, our 18th district, that are rural poverty, that have a lot of rural impoverished issues. People are leaving the profession. Teachers don't feel compelled to stay with it. And a lot of that is how teachers are treated and how schools are funded state to state. So it's obviously a state issue, public schools. But in the same vein that, obviously Bernie Sanders became this face and voice of the democratic socialist movement, I feel compelled as an educator to step forward and say, hey, let's wake up. Our schools are we better be careful, because if we continue to go down the path of not focusing in on all of our school districts, not just the ones that our children are in, then what does that say about our democracy? And I think we're at a tipping point. So again, people are listening to the message. We're excited. There's a lot of energy out there, and we're excited to see what happens next Tuesday.
All right, sounds good. I want to give the links for Brian, as we always do, and the links are always down below in YouTube, in the description box and comment section on Facebook. Donations and volunteers make a huge difference. Go out there in the 19 counties with Brian and help him out.
Hey, thanks so much, man.
We appreciate you joining us, Brian.
We're gonna see what happens. Thanks a lot.
No problem. All right, so we're done. I've got a post game coming up for you guys. The post game for the members. We are going to talk about UFOs. It's a fun little topic. They're here. I've got the videos to show it. And it's not some random dude who took the video, it's the US military. And then another fun topic, Anna found her old report cards from elementary school. I'm super curious to see what those are about. And then speaking of the crisis in education that we just did with Brian, I actually want to talk about that in regards to my kids' schools, which I'm a little frustrated by. I'll tell you all those stories. Of course, if you're not a member, tytnetwork.com/join to become a member and get all the post games and all these shows ad-free. All right, we'll see you there.